Are you kidding me? She shouted it into the microphone. From the moment he asked to the moment she snapped, it took 83 seconds, and in that time, she couldn't answer one simple question. And the man who made it happen wasn't a seasoned prosecutor, wasn't a sharp-tongued freshman congresswoman. It was an 87-year-old congressman from New York who had, and this is not a joke, literally fallen asleep in his chair 20 minutes earlier. His head had dropped. His aide had nudged him. He had blinked back to consciousness. And then he walked to that microphone and asked one single question that shattered everything Pam Bondi had carefully constructed over the past year. And when she heard them, something behind her eyes went dark. That question was this: how many of Epstein's individuals connected to the case have you indicted? It wasn't complicated. It wasn't a trap. It was 6 words. But what happened right after that question was even worse than anyone expected. That's when everything started to fall apart. That's it. That's all he asked, and it destroyed her. The room felt different that morning, quieter, tighter, like something was about to break. People weren't there for politics anymore. They were there for answers. Pam Bondi entered with her team in a tight formation, the way officials do when they've been briefed to expect turbulence. She wore the expression of a woman who had been through Senate confirmations, press ambushes, and hostile questioning before, and walked out fine every time. Her hands were steady. Her notes were organized. She took her seat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and waited. For the first hour, everything proceeded exactly as her team had prepared for. Republican members gave her time to recite her accomplishments. She cited document release numbers. She praised the administration's record on border security. She was comfortable, practiced, almost relaxed. Her fingers were loose around her pen. Her posture was open. She looked like a woman who intended to leave that room with her credibility intact. Then Nadler's turn came. He moved slowly. He always moves slowly now. Age will do that. He settled into his chair, shuffled his papers, and looked at her across the witness table with the unhurried expression of someone who has been lied to enough times to stop being surprised by it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't open with a dramatic statement. He just asked, "How many of Epstein's individuals connected to the case have you indicted?" The silence lasted 4 full seconds. A room that had been full of shuffling papers and ambient noise went completely still. Bondi's jaw tightened, visible to anyone watching closely on camera. Her pen, which had been resting loosely in her fingers, was suddenly gripped. She opened her mouth, and what came out was not an answer. She talked about the Obama administration. She talked about Merrick Garland. She talked about how no previous attorney general had been asked these questions. She cited the volume of released documents. 3 million pages, 6 million pages, historic transparency. Her voice built in volume and confidence as she moved further and further away from the question. But that wasn't the worst part. When she finally ran out of previous administrations to redirect to, she turned to the economy. The Dow is over $50,000, she announced, her chin lifting slightly, as if this were responsive. The S&P is at almost 7,000. The Nasdaq is smashing records. Americans' retirement savings are booming. That is what we should be talking about. No one spoke, not even a whisper, not for 3 full seconds. You could hear papers stop moving, even the keyboards went silent. Reporters stopped typing. Committee staff members looked up from their laptops. Even the Republican members who had been running interference for her all morning paused, uncertain how to respond to what they had just heard. The victims in the gallery sat perfectly still. Nadler didn't blink. He waited for her to finish. And then, with the measured calm of a man who had decided before walking in that he would not leave without an answer, he asked again, "How many of Epstein's individuals connected to the case have you indicted?" That was the second time. And this time, everyone in the room realized she wasn't going to answer. And this is where Bondi's physical composure began to fracture in ways that cameras captured and words struggle to fully describe. Her neck flushed. Her breathing got sharper, faster. Her fingers tightened around the pen until her knuckles turned pale. She leaned forward toward her microphone with an energy that was no longer composed. She started talking about impeachment, about Robert Mueller, about how she had been on the other side of those Senate hearings. Her voice was climbing now. The practiced cadence was gone. Nadler waited again, patient, almost gentle. "How many?" he said. "Just give me the number." What happened next was the moment. Bondi's hand came off the table. She pointed, not toward any document, not toward any evidence, just outward. The gesture of someone who has run out of arguments and arrived at pure frustration. Her voice cracked across the microphone loud enough to make reporters in the back row flinch.
"I'll have to do with anything? That's what they just asked? Are you kidding?" Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan?
The room exploded around her, and for a moment, no one was even listening to the answer anymore. Chairman Jordan's gavel, Republican members shouting procedural objections, voices overlapping, and through all of it, Nadler sat exactly where he had been sitting for the entire 83 seconds, slightly amused, completely unmoved. There was a thin, quiet smile on his face, not triumphant, not cruel, just the expression of a man who had asked a simple question and received every answer except the one he needed. He looked at the chairman. "I just like my question answered," he said. He never got one. Some files had already been sealed years earlier, and no one has ever explained who ordered it, and what no camera fully captured. But what people in that room described afterward was the progression. It was not just one moment of losing control, it was a sequence that unfolded in stages, each one more revealing than the last. First, the jaw tightening when the question landed, then the pen gripped white knuckles tight during the first deflection, then the neck flushing red as Nadler asked again, unhurried, the second time. Then the voice climbing half an octave as she ran out of previous administrations to redirect toward. And finally, the hand off the table, the pointed finger, the voice cracking across the microphone, and the "Are you kidding me?" that went out live to millions watching at home. 83 seconds, from composed Attorney General to national meltdown, and Nadler never raised his voice once. That contrast is the story, because when power loses composure over a 6-word question, it tells you something specific about what that question is actually protecting. Calm people do not explode at simple arithmetic. Transparent institutions do not redirect accountability hearings towards stock market indices. Officials with nothing to hide do not need 83 seconds to avoid saying the word zero. The number was 0. It was always going to be 0. Because some of those records didn't just list names, they showed patterns, repeated entries, the same people appearing in different places at different times, and those patterns weren't random. And yet, none of them were ever called in. Because those files weren't empty. They included repeated names, timelines, and connections that overlapped in ways investigators don't ignore. And yet, not a single one of those names was ever questioned. Some of those entries were already marked for follow-up, notes attached, flags raised. But when the time came to act, those flags disappeared, and no one ever said who cleared them. But here is what that explosion actually told the country, and why it matters far beyond the theater of that single exchange. When an attorney general cannot answer how many accountability cases her department has opened, it is not a communications failure, it is a policy. Because the answer, under 0, not one indictment in a full year, is a decision that someone made and continues to defend. Every pivot to economic statistics, every redirection to previous administrations, every eruption of outrage at the questioner, these are not mistakes. They are a system working exactly as designed. Consider what sat underneath that hearing. The lead prosecutor of this case had been removed, replaced by someone installed for reasons that had nothing to do with case experience. That replacement pursued indictments in completely separate matters, indictments that 2 different grand juries in 2 different courts in the same week refused to bring. 2 different grand juries rejected the case, twice, in the same week, and still, nothing happened. At one point, internal reviews had already flagged inconsistencies, statements that didn't align, timelines that didn't match. But instead of pushing deeper, the process stopped, quietly. Internal reports had already flagged inconsistencies, statements that didn't match timelines, records that pointed in different directions. But instead of expanding the investigation, it stopped. And no one ever explained why. Consider what the document release actually contained. When the sealed files were finally made public after years of congressional pressure, they came out in a form that protected the names of individuals identified in sworn statements while publishing the identities of the most vulnerable people in the case. That is not an administrative error. Someone reviewed those redactions, someone approved them, and no one in that hearing room, not the chairman, not the attorney general, has answered for that decision. Consider the survivors who sat in the gallery that day. They did not come to Washington to watch an attorney general discuss NASDAQ performance. They came because they were promised accountability. They got 83 seconds of market data and one "Are you kidding me?" directed at the congressman who asked for it on their behalf. Nadler's question was 6 words. His persistence lasted 83 seconds. His calm in the face of that explosion was, arguably, the most powerful thing said in that room all day. It communicated something no prepared talking point can neutralize. I know the answer. I know you know the answer. And I am going to keep asking until you say it out loud. 1 year. One lead prosecutor fired. 6 million documents released in a format that protected the wrong people. 0 charges, 0 indictments, 0 accountability for any individual named in sworn federal testimony. And she knew the Dow number by heart. Bondi has since left the position. Her departure, in the careful language of official Washington, was described as a mutual decision. But the question Nadler asked in that hearing room has not been answered by anyone who came after her. The files remain partially sealed. The individuals named in federal testimony remain uncharged. The survivors who sat in that gallery are still waiting. So here is what we want to know from you. And we mean this genuinely, because the comments on this video are where the real conversation happens. So tell me this. Was Bondi fired because she couldn't answer that question? Or because someone didn't want her to? Type one word: incompetence or cover-up. Because that question, unlike the one asked in Congress in Yemen, deserves a real response.
He is the most transparent president in the nation's history. For 3 million pages of documents, Donald Trump signed that law. Have you apologized to President Trump? All should be apologizing.